What if I told you that just one thing is enough to make a narcissist utterly unable to cope? Would you believe it? One thing that requires no heated arguments, no anger, no retaliation, something simple yet immensely powerful, already within your reach, just waiting to be awakened. And once you embrace it, their entire game falls apart. No noise, no revenge, just a deep, unshakable return to yourself. Because if you've ever been caught in a narcissist's web, you know the slow erosion of the soul. You know the feeling of loving with all your heart, only to be met with coldness, of sacrificing endlessly, yet never being understood, of desperately trying to salvage something that, deep down, you knew was already rotting. You became accustomed to explaining, compromising, forgiving over and over again, clinging to the fragile hope that love might conquer all. But then one day, in the stillness between the invisible wounds, you hear a tiny voice inside you whisper, "Enough." That moment, however small, is the beginning of your awakening. It's the moment you start to realize your worth was never held in someone else's eyes, and certainly not in the manipulative tricks of a narcissist. And from that very moment you grasp the one power they fear most, your unwavering silence. Not the silence of surrender, but the silence of someone who is no longer deceived, no longer needs validation, no longer seeks approval from anyone but themselves. A narcissist survives off your reactions. They need your anger to feel important. They need your pain to confirm they still have power. They need your confusion, your fear, your hurt to sustain the illusion of their grand but fragile ego. But when you stop reacting, when you choose peace over rage, when you step away from the game they so carefully constructed, you dismantle the very world they depend on. And that is what they cannot endure, a super empath who is no longer swayed, no longer trapped in emotional snares, a soul who has learned to hold on to their own light even in the darkest of nights. They cannot defeat someone who has stopped fighting. They cannot control someone who no longer plays by their rules. In this video, we'll dive deep into that secret. We'll explore why your calmness holds more devastating power than any explosion of rage. We'll expose the desperate tactics a narcissist will resort to when they feel their grip slipping away. And most importantly, we'll learn how to keep our hearts steady in the storm, not out of fear, not out of hatred, but because of one undeniable truth. You deserve your freedom. I invite you to stay with me until the end of this journey, because when this video ends, you won't just understand why a narcissist crumbles before your silent strength. You'll become the living embodiment of that strength. No more imprisoning yourself with unanswered questions. No more seeking healing from the very hands that inflicted the wounds. Only you remain free, clear, and whole. The awakening has begun, and you, yes, you, are the one who will write the rest of the story. To understand why a narcissist cannot bear the presence of a super empath, we must first define clearly who exactly is a super empath. They are not simply sensitive souls who feel deeply for the pain of others. A super empath possesses a rare combination, a razor-sharp intuition, profound compassion, and an unshakable inner strength forged through the very wounds they have endured. They don't just feel emotions, they read the unspoken truths behind words, the silent contradictions never voiced aloud. And most importantly, once they recognize injustice, a super empath does not stay silent forever. They act. That's why, when a super empath gets entangled in a relationship with a narcissist, at first, things may unfold much like they do for any other victim. They love wholeheartedly, they forgive, they sacrifice. But the difference lies here. A super empath has a limit, and once that limit is crossed, not typically by a dramatic event, but by the slow accumulation of countless disappointments, an awakening begins. And when a super empath awakens, they no longer try to salvage something that has long since decayed. Instead, they return to themselves. And that's when the narcissist's entire game begins to collapse. Because in order to survive, a narcissist depends on a constant stream of emotional fuel from others, attention, admiration, or even outrage. They sustain their fragile ego through the emotional reflections of those around them, but when faced with an awakened super empath, they no longer receive that fuel. The super empath no longer reacts as expected. They no longer cry, no longer beg, no longer exhaust themselves trying to explain or persuade. Instead, they choose silence. A silence not born of fear, but of deep self-respect. And to a narcissist, that silence feels like a massive crack, splitting apart the illusionary walls they spent so long constructing. Moreover, it's essential to understand, when a super empath stops reacting, they simultaneously withdraw from the narcissist's carefully constructed power game, a game where every word, every action, every emotional reaction was a piece moved to manipulate, dominate, and control. When the only remaining player refuses to keep playing, the game board becomes meaningless, and the narcissist, who lacks a stable, genuine sense of self, plunges into crisis. They cannot control someone who no longer plays by their rules. They cannot manipulate a soul who sees right through the illusion. More importantly, the super empath doesn't need to prove anything. They don't need to win endless arguments. They don't need to explain themselves to be understood. Their calm, silent presence is the loudest declaration. I am no longer part of this toxic dance. And that silent declaration strips the narcissist of the only real power they ever had, the ability to control another person's emotion. Ultimately, the true victory of a super empath isn't about forcing the narcissist to admit defeat, because a narcissist never will. The real victory happens internally, when the super empath walks away without carrying resentment, without clinging to the hope of change. They leave carrying only the lessons, the growth, and, above all, the kind of freedom no one can take away. And that is something the narcissist will never understand. They will only feel the bitter truth. No matter how hard they try, no matter how many manipulative traps they set, an awakened super empath will never return. Not out of hatred, but because they have found something infinitely more precious, themselves, in their strongest, freest, and most unbreakable form. If the very existence of a super empath is already a challenge for a narcissist, there is something that surpasses even that. It is the steadfast calmness a super empath achieves after awakening. Because every strategy the narcissist deploys, from flattery and manipulation to sabotage, only works as long as the victim reacts. But when calmness appears, all their attacks become meaningless. To understand this better, we need to remember, a narcissist does not truly possess a stable sense of self. They don't have an inner foundation of self-worth. Everything they believe about themselves, their importance, their power, their lovability, must be reflected back to them through others. That's why, when someone no longer responds, no longer plays into the script they orchestrated, their fragile inner world begins to fracture, piece by piece. Next, it's important to emphasize that this calmness is not cold-hearted cruelty or emotional numbness. On the contrary, it's the manifestation of a heart that has been healed, a heart no longer driven by the desperate need for acceptance or the fear of rejection. A super empath doesn't choose silence to protect themselves. They are not indifferent to injustice. They simply refuse to participate in meaningless battles. And it is precisely because of this that such calmness wields devastating power over the narcissist. Without emotional reactions, the narcissist no longer knows where they stand in the other person's mind. Without anger, they cannot deceive themselves into believing they still matter. Without visible pain, they cannot feel confident they still hold power. They are thrust into a silent panic, where every familiar tactic fails, and every effort to manipulate crashes against an impenetrable wall of inner strength. Moreover, this calmness doesn't just dismantle the narcissist's power games, it opens up a new space for the super empath, a space of healing and rebirth. In this space, pain is no longer denied, but acknowledged and healed. In this space, self-worth is no longer a bargaining chip traded for affection or mistreatment, but is asserted, unshakably, from within. It is within this silence that the super empath finds themselves again. They no longer try to explain what the narcissist never intended to understand. They no longer scream into the void, begging for empathy that will never come. Instead, they stand tall. They listen inward. They forgive themselves for staying too long. And then they walk away, not out of anger, but out of love. In the end, what the narcissist cannot endure is not the act of being left. It is the calm indifference with which they are left behind. No more suffering, no more pleading, no sliver of hope left to cling to. And for them, that is the cruelest punishment. A punishment that requires no accusations, just a heart that has chosen freedom over hollow promises. And you, if you are standing at that threshold, if you feel that quiet peace growing inside you, know this: you are not weak. You are not heartless. You are healing. You are becoming invulnerable to those who once exploited your goodness. And one day, you'll realize, this unshakable calm you have claimed is the greatest gift you have ever given yourself. When a super empath stops reacting, the narcissist does not simply walk away. On the contrary, that's when they begin to escalate their manipulation tactics, doing whatever it takes to regain the control they have lost. Because to them, being ignored is not just a failure, it is a direct threat to their already fragile sense of existence. And to combat this inner panic, they will resort to anything, even the most desperate measures. One of the first tactics a narcissist often uses when they lose their emotional supply is a sudden return to love bombing. They shift their behavior dramatically, becoming unusually gentle, attentive, even excessively caring. Sweet words, apologies, and promises of a better future are showered relentlessly. Their goal is clear: to awaken your empathy, to soften your resolve, and to pull you back into your old role, the provider of emotional fuel. However, unlike before, an awakened super empath can now see the hollow truth behind this charade. Their unshakable calmness becomes an impenetrable shield, protecting them from falling back into the familiar cycle. When the narcissist realizes that fake affection no longer works, they escalate to another tactic: intensified gaslighting. They begin twisting reality, distorting memories, sowing doubt into your mind. They deny what happened, they blame you, they play the victim. They will do anything to make you feel guilty for leaving or for daring to remain silent. But now, the super empath is no longer vulnerable to these mind games. Their newfound clarity, built from within, helps them stay grounded in their truth, refusing to be pulled into a senseless tug of war. Following the failure of gaslighting, the narcissist often escalates even further with triangulation, bringing one or more third parties into the game. They may flaunt new romantic interests to provoke jealousy. They may enlist family, friends, or mutual acquaintances to spread lies and tarnish your reputation. The goal remains the same: to provoke a reaction, to force you back into the emotional battlefield. Yet what the narcissist fails to anticipate is this: the awakened super empath is no longer triggered by childish theatrics. They recognize that every stunt only exposes the narcissist's growing desperation and emptiness, and they choose to walk away, in silence, with pride intact. But it doesn't stop there. When all attempts to re-engage you fail, the narcissist may play their final card, the victim narrative. They will craft stories in which they are the one abandoned, betrayed, mistreated. They seek sympathy from others, trying to regain the attention they no longer receive from you. This is both a survival tactic and an attempt to destroy your image within the shared community. But again, the super empath has moved beyond the need to be understood by those ensnared in manipulation. They know the truth doesn't require argument. They understand their value is not determined by the distorted perceptions of the manipulated. And so, with each act of escalation, the narcissist only further exposes their own fragility and desperation. Meanwhile, the super empath, anchored in unwavering calmness and deep self-awareness, continues to solidify their inner freedom, proving, step by step, that they are no longer a victim, but the master of their own destiny. Finally, here's the most important truth you must hold onto. Every desperate tactic the narcissist throws at you after losing control is not a sign of your failure. It is the clearest proof of your victory. Because in the twisted world of a narcissist, nothing is more terrifying than facing someone they can no longer reach, no longer sway, no longer drag back into the game. And if you have reached that moment, know this: you have not just survived, you have completely shattered the cycle of manipulation that once imprisoned your soul. When the super empath withdraws with steadfast calm, the narcissist experiences a deeper failure than almost anything else in their life. Yet, paradoxically, you will never hear them admit it. Because in the fragile, distorted inner world of a narcissist, admitting defeat isn't just about losing a battle. It's a direct threat to the entire false self they have clung to for survival. First, to understand why they can't admit it, we must look at the psychological root of narcissism, the core wound of shame, a deep, primal injury from childhood that they have masked with layers of grandiosity and a false sense of invincibility. They built their identity on the illusion that they are superior, special, and untouchable. To acknowledge that someone has left them, that they have been rejected, that their manipulations have failed, would be the same as tearing down the carefully constructed tower of illusions they have spent their entire lives building. Next, we must recognize that narcissists operate through an extreme defense mechanism called reality distortion. When faced with failure, instead of confronting the truth, they rewrite the story in their own minds to soften the blow. They will tell themselves that they were the ones who left you, that you were too weak, too demanding, too unworthy of them. They will turn you into the problem to avoid having to stare into the hollow emptiness within themselves. And this is why, even when you can see the collapse in their eyes, their mouth will still deny it. Their actions will still pretend. They are the ones who won. Even more, admitting defeat would force the narcissist to confront their most primal fear. The fear that they are unlovable. The fear that without someone to manipulate, they are nothing. And for a psyche already so deeply wounded, that truth is simply too devastating to bear. So they choose denial. They choose to rewrite the past. They choose to live inside illusions they craft just to keep their fragile ego from shattering. And finally, you must understand this. The fact that you don't receive acknowledgement or an apology from the narcissist has nothing to do with your worth. It does not mean you were wrong. It does not mean they have won. It simply means that within their broken defense system, admitting your growth, your freedom, your victory would require them to face what they fear most. But they are small, that they are not enough, that they are deeply, painfully vulnerable, and their entire psychological survival depends on denying that truth at all costs. So when you walk away from a narcissist and hear nothing, no acknowledgement, no validation, do not let it make you doubt yourself. Do not let their silence or their fabricated narratives lure you back. The truth does not need validation to be true. Your inner freedom does not need applause to be priceless. Remember this: the greatest victory is not in hearing the narcissist say, "I was wrong." The greatest victory is when you no longer need them to say it. It's when you move forward with gratitude for the hard lessons learned, and with compassion for yourself, the brave soul who had the courage to step out of the maze of manipulation and reclaim your own life. Really, you step out of the manipulative whirlwind of a narcissist. The real journey is only just beginning, because leaving the physical relationship is merely the first step. The true work lies in freeing your mind, healing deep-rooted wounds, and rebuilding a strong, unshakable sense of self, a journey that demands perseverance, courage, and absolute honesty with yourself. First and foremost, the path to becoming someone who cannot be manipulated begins with a clear understanding of your own worth. It sounds simple, but in reality, it requires you to dismantle every false belief the narcissist planted in your mind, that you must please others to be worthy of love, that your value depends on external validation, you must learn to see your worth as something intrinsic, non-negotiable, untouchable, something no one can give you or take away. Next, one of the most crucial pillars of this journey is mastering emotional regulation. Narcissists manipulate by triggering emotional reactions, anger, fear, guilt. When you learn to observe your emotions without being swept away by them, you strip the manipulator of their most powerful weapon. Emotional regulation does not mean suppressing or denying your feelings. It means acknowledging them, understanding them, and choosing your response with intention rather than reacting automatically. Alongside that, establishing strong boundaries is absolutely vital. A person who cannot be manipulated knows where their limits are and defends them without hesitation. This might mean saying no without guilt, walking away from relationships that no longer serve you without needing to justify yourself, and refusing to allow anyone, even those you once loved, to violate the sacred space of your inner peace. Beyond that, maintaining calmness as a symbol of strength is a key skill. Manipulators thrive on the emotional chaos they create. When you stay composed, every one of their tactics falls flat. Your silence, your refusal to react, your unwavering presence becomes a fortress that no storm from the outside can breach. However, achieving this calmness isn't just a matter of intellectual understanding. You must dive deep within yourself to heal old wounds, the fear of abandonment, the fear of rejection, the fear of being unworthy, the very injuries that once made you vulnerable to manipulation. Healing doesn't happen overnight. It is a patient journey of facing your pain, letting go of unrealistic expectations, and learning to love yourself, with all the scars that remain. And ultimately, this journey isn't only about protecting yourself. It opens up a vast, beautiful horizon, living authentically. When you are no longer manipulable, you no longer live to please others or chase hollow standards. You are free to listen to your inner voice, to pursue your passions, and to build relationships grounded in mutual respect, not in control or fear. You will realize that the greatest strength is not in conquering others, but in conquering the ghosts within yourself, the fears, the old reactive patterns, the desperate need for validation. And when you conquer those, you become a new version of yourself, stronger, calmer, freer. The journey to becoming unmanipulable does not promise ease, but it promises a reward beyond price, true freedom, deep wholeness, and a life where you never again bow to any manipulator. And if you are already walking this path, know this: every step forward, no matter how small, is a mighty victory, a living declaration that says, I have come home to myself. And this time, I will never lose myself again. When a super empath awakens, they do not merely reclaim their own freedom, they become a beacon of light for those still struggling in the darkness, for those still trapped in the maze of manipulation they themselves once fought so hard to escape. Because someone who has fallen into the deepest pit of pain, who has lost themselves and yet found the strength to rise and be reborn, stands as living proof that healing is real and freedom is possible. First and foremost, an awakened super empath carries within them a priceless gift, wisdom born from lived experience. They don't just know theories about manipulation. They haven't just read books about self-worth. They have survived the silent battles, felt the agony of loving while being betrayed, stood at the edge of despair, and chosen to move forward. That's why when they speak, their words carry more than logic. They carry the weight of truth, of experience, and of deep, abiding compassion. Next, a true super empath understands that everyone has their own journey. They do not impose their awakening on others, and they do not wield their pain as a weapon to judge or criticize. Instead, they become a quiet mirror, a living testament that recovery isn't some far-off theory, but a reality that can be reached through perseverance, through faith, and through unconditional love for oneself. Moreover, a super empath no longer seeks external validation. Their deep understanding of themselves allows them to love without dependency, to give without being exploited, and to build relationships rooted in mutual respect, not control. They become silent guides, sowing seeds of hope into wounded hearts, not through grand speeches, but simply through their whole, authentic presence. However, to maintain this role, the super empath must continually care for their inner world, because even the brightest light can dim if it is not nourished at its source, self-love. Maintaining healing habits, constantly checking and protecting their boundaries, and guarding their inner peace against the temptation to fall back into old roles. These are all vital parts of living as an awakened being. Ultimately, the greatest gift a super empath brings to the world is not found in who they have defeated or how they have avenged themselves. It lies in this profound truth. Love is not weakness. Sensitivity is not a burden. And compassion, when fused with wisdom and strong boundaries, is one of the greatest powers a human being can possess. You, if you are walking this path, if you have stepped out of the shadows and are learning to guard your light, remember, you are not just healing yourself. Your existence, your growth, and the serene light you radiate are quietly illuminating the path for countless others who are still searching for their way out. You do not need to shout. You do not need to prove anything. Your silent, unwavering presence is the most powerful guidance there is. And that is the timeless beauty of a super empath. One who has awakened, who has claimed their freedom, and who now lives not just for themselves, but as a quiet, steady flame, lighting the way for others still lost in the dark. In the end, the journey from being a manipulated soul to becoming an awakened super empath is not merely a story of overcoming pain. It is a story of rebirth. A quiet yet profound rebirth, not marked by loud, triumphant moments, but by each peaceful breath you reclaim for yourself. Because the greatest victory in life is not when you prove something to others, but when you no longer need to prove anything at all. You simply live true to your authentic worth, without compromise, without pleading, without regret. First, the peace you have achieved is not a random gift. It is the result of every hard choice you have made, choosing to walk away from a toxic relationship, choosing to stop explaining yourself, choosing to trust your inner knowing even when everything around you tried to deny it. Every step you took, whether trembling or strong, has built a version of you that is more resilient, more discerning, and more compassionately powerful than ever before. Next, you will realize that peace does not come from changing the narcissist, nor from revenge, nor from demanding justice. True peace comes when you stop seeking answers from places that were never capable of giving them. When you understand that you don't need apologies, you don't need acknowledgement, you don't need any explanations to grant yourself the right to heal and move forward, that is when you free your soul from all invisible chains, allowing yourself to walk onward with a light heart and clear eyes. Moreover, this journey will teach you that inner strength does not mean becoming cold or closed off. On the contrary, you will learn to love more deeply, but this time from a place beyond fear. You require zero toleration in big life. You will love without needing it to be reciprocated to validate your worth. You will give not out of fear of losing, but because generosity is the most beautiful essence of who you are. And in doing so, you are not just reborn for yourself. You are planting seeds for a kinder, more genuine world. However, this rebirth demands continuous vigilance. It requires the courage to choose yourself every single day. There will be moments when old memories resurface, when loneliness tests your resolve, when you doubt whether you are on the right path. But even in those moments, the peace you fought so hard to attain will be your guiding light. It will remind you have stood in the darkest places before and you found your way out. And finally, if you are hearing these words today, know this: you are not alone. There is a community of strong, silent souls like you. Those who once fell, were crushed under the weight of manipulation, yet chose to rise, heal, and shine. And you, with all that you have endured and all the light you are nurturing within, are an irreplaceable part of that community. So keep walking, keep choosing freedom, keep lighting your life with that unshakable peace you have claimed. And if this journey has given you strength, awareness, and a deep gratitude for yourself, then remember, this is not just a personal victory. It is a triumph of light over darkness, of truth over illusion, of authentic love over every power game ever played. Thank you for listening. Thank you for having the courage to face the truth. And thank you for choosing yourself. If you see yourself reflected in this journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, share your story, and together, let's keep lighting up the world with a flame that will never be extinguished.